That opening shot of The Sound of Music is really the quintessential picture postcard shot, really. And yet we had such terrible difficulties shooting that scene.
What if one of the world's most beloved musicals was built on mistakes, rewrites, and surprising truths no one told you? The Sound of Music may seem flawless on screen, but behind the scenes lies a story full of secrets, near disasters, and real-life twists Hollywood never showed. From swapped identities to dangerous filming moments, what really happened might change how you see this classic forever.
Look at this right here. Can you look at, just take a peek. Do you remember doing this? I mean, this is iconic.
I remember doing it.
Julie Andrews, is it a soundstage? Is this real?
Are you kidding? That's the real.
To start with, Julie Andrews, who played Maria, had no experience playing the guitar before filming began. Even though the movie features her confidently strumming and singing, learning the instrument was a real struggle for her. In interviews, Andrews admitted that trying to sing and play the guitar at the same time was a lot more complicated than it looked. She found it difficult to concentrate on both tasks at once, especially with the added pressure of cameras rolling and a film crew watching. To calm her nerves before some of the more demanding scenes, she occasionally had a small sip of Austrian schnapps. It wasn't something she did regularly, but it helped her relax just enough to get through those moments on set. Schnapps is a strong alcoholic drink that's quite popular in parts of Europe, particularly in Austria, where most of the movie is set. Interestingly, Christopher Plummer, who played Captain Von Trapp, also prepared to play the guitar and sing for his role. He reportedly took lessons to get into character, but despite his efforts, the final film does not feature his actual voice or guitar playing. Instead, a professional singer and guitarist were brought in to dub over those parts. The filmmakers made this decision to ensure the musical scenes had the right sound and tone, and it's something Plummer later said he understood, even though he had hoped to perform those sections himself. One of the more serious incidents occurred during the filming of the scene where the Von Trapp family falls into the lake. In that moment, the boat tips over and everyone lands in the water. What most viewers don't realize is that Kim Karath, the young actress who played Gretel, couldn't swim. This posed a significant risk during the filming of the lake scene. Julie Andrews, who was supposed to catch Gretel and keep her safe in the water, ended up falling backwards when the boat capsized and lost her balance. As a result, she wasn't able to grab Kim in time. The young actress panicked, swallowed a large amount of water, and ended up vomiting on one of the other actors, Heather Menzies, who played Louisa. Although it was an uncomfortable and alarming experience, Karath was unharmed in the end. Still, it was a real scare for the crew, and it reminded everyone how tricky it can be to film with children in unpredictable environments. That wasn't the only tension on set. Christopher Plummer, despite delivering a memorable performance as the stern but loving Captain Von Trapp, didn't actually enjoy working on the film. Over the years, he openly shared his mixed feelings about the experience. He described the film as overly sentimental and even gave it nicknames like The Sound of Mucus and S&M. These weren't meant to be cruel, but they reflected his personal discomfort with the tone of the story, which he found a bit too sweet for his taste. To cope with the long days of shooting and the overall experience, Plummer reportedly spent a lot of his time eating and drinking, sometimes to excess. As a result, he gained enough weight during production that the costume department had to adjust his wardrobe more than once. While he was clearly critical of the film during its production, he later came to appreciate the impact it had on audiences around the world, and acknowledged the love people continued to have for it. Another lesser-known fact about the film is that the grand house shown as the Von Trapp residence wasn't a single building at all. In reality, two different locations were used to create the illusion of one large home. One location was used for the front exterior, while another was used for the back. None of the interior scenes were filmed in a real house either. They were shot on specially built sets in Hollywood. The goal was to create a visually consistent and elegant family home that fit the romanticized feel of the story. Similarly, the famous gazebo used in the scene for the song 16 Going on 17 wasn't a permanent structure. It was built specifically for the movie. After filming wrapped, it was moved not once, but twice. Today, it's located at Hellbrunn Palace in Salzburg, Austria, and it's a popular tourist attraction for fans of the movie. People visit the site expecting to see an original filming location, but what they find is a reconstructed version of a set piece designed just for the musical. The production team also created a very realistic-looking version of Nürnberg Abbey, where Maria begins her journey. Rather than filming at the actual abbey, the crew recreated it on a Hollywood set. Art director Boris Levin went to great lengths to make sure the replica looked authentic, down to matching specific stones and architectural details. Many viewers, and even some Salzburg tour guides, continue to believe that those scenes were filmed at the real abbey, which shows how convincing the set design really was. One of the most climactic scenes in the movie is when the Von Trapp family hides in a graveyard to avoid being caught by the Nazis. The scene has a lot of dramatic weight, and it gives the film a tense and suspenseful ending. But in truth, it wasn't filmed in Austria at all. The entire sequence was shot on a studio lot in Hollywood. Even today, some tour guides in Austria tell visitors that the scene was filmed locally, which adds to the mystery and myth around the film's production. Finally, there's the matter of the song Edelweiss, which many viewers assume is a traditional Austrian folk song. It's easy to see why. It's performed in a simple, heartfelt way and appears at a key moment in the story. But the truth is, Edelweiss was written for the original Broadway production of The Sound of Music by the songwriting duo Rodgers and Hammerstein. It wasn't part of Austria's cultural or musical heritage before the musical was created. In fact, Edelweiss was the last song Oscar Hammerstein ever wrote, before his death in 1960, just 9 months after the stage musical premiered. Over time, the song became so closely associated with Austria that many people assumed it was a genuine folk tune or even a national anthem. While Austrians appreciate the song, it holds more sentimental value abroad than within Austria itself. This shows just how powerful film and theatre can be in shaping public perception, even if what's shown on screen isn't entirely historically accurate. In the mid-1950s, a German film producer approached Maria von Trapp about adapting her memoir into a movie. She had written about her life with the Von Trapp family and their musical journey. The producer offered her $10,000 for the rights to her story. Maria asked if she could also receive a share of the film's profits, but the producer claimed that under German law, royalties could not be paid to individuals who weren't German citizens. By that time, Maria had already become an American citizen, so she accepted what he said and signed the agreement, giving up all future rights to her life story. Later, he returned with a different offer, $9,000 in cash if she agreed on the spot. This was a large amount of money for the Von Trapps, who had never earned that kind of sum from their singing career, so Maria accepted the deal. What she didn't know at the time was that the producer had lied. There was no such law preventing royalty payments. He simply took advantage of her trust and acquired full rights to her story for very little money. Despite the unfair deal, the creators of the Broadway musical and the film, Rodgers and Hammerstein, decided to give the Von Trapp family a small share of the profits. They weren't required to do this, but they did it as a gesture of goodwill. Even though it was only a fraction of what the Von Trapps could have earned, Maria never expressed bitterness. She later said the joy the film brought to people around the world was worth far more than money. The film also changes how Maria came into the Von Trapp household. In The Sound of Music, she arrives as a governess for all 7 children, but in reality, Maria was only brought in to care for one child at first. It was the year 1926, and Captain Georg von Trapp's daughter, also named Maria, had fallen seriously ill with scarlet fever. This was the same illness that had taken her mother's life a few years earlier. Because the girl was too weak to walk the long distance to school, George requested help from Nürnberg Abbey in Salzburg, where young women studied and trained to become nuns. The abbey sent 21-year-old Maria Kacheda, who had a background in teaching and was living at the abbey due to her own health issues. The plan was for her to stay for 10 months, help the girl with her schooling, and then return to become a nun. However, her time with the family ended up changing the course of her life. When it came to casting the movie, the role of Maria was eventually given to Julie Andrews, but it wasn't a straightforward choice from the beginning. Screenwriter Ernest Lehman had Julie Andrews in mind right away, believing she was perfect for the role. But when director Robert Wise joined the project, he considered other actresses first, including Grace Kelly and Shirley Jones. Grace Kelly had left acting after becoming the Princess of Monaco, and Shirley Jones was known for her musical roles, but neither ended up being cast. What changed Wise's mind was seeing early footage of Mary Poppins, a film Andrews had just completed. Although it hadn't been released yet, the preview showed her charm and natural screen presence. Wise quickly agreed that Andrews was the right choice. Still, Julie Andrews was a bit hesitant. She didn't want the film version to be overly sweet or unrealistic, something she felt the stage version sometimes leaned toward. Fortunately, both Lehman and Wise shared her concerns and wanted to create a more grounded version of the story. Their shared vision helped convince Andrews to take the role, and she signed on for a salary of $225,000. Quite a large amount at the time. Her performance became one of the most memorable aspects of the film, and her portrayal of Maria is still loved by audiences decades later. Another area where the film differs from reality is the depiction of Captain George von Trapp. In the movie, he's shown as cold, emotionally distant, and very strict with his children. He uses a whistle to summon them and runs his household like a military operation. But in real life, he was very different. According to members of the Von Trapp family and author Tom Santopietro, Georg was a kind and affectionate father. He did use a whistle, and he did dress his children in matching sailor suits, but he didn't make them march or behave like soldiers. Johannes von Trapp, the youngest child from Maria and Georg's marriage, later said in a BBC interview that his father was a very charming man, generous, open, and not the strict military-style parent shown in the movie. He also explained that his mother, Maria, tried to convince the filmmakers to change the way his father was portrayed so it would be closer to the truth. Unfortunately, her efforts didn't lead to any changes. In reality, it was Maria who had more difficulty expressing emotions, as she had grown up in a very strict environment herself. She later admitted that it took time for her to learn how to show love and affection openly. Another important figure from the real Von Trapp story was left out of the film entirely: Father Franz Wozner. During the 1930s, the Von Trapps faced financial difficulties after their bank failed during the Great Depression. To make ends meet, they began renting out rooms in their large home. One of their guests was Father Wozner, a Catholic priest with a deep love of music. He heard the family singing and saw their potential. Soon he became their musical director, helping them improve their skills and eventually guiding them to professional performances. Maria von Trapp later credited him with turning the family into a proper musical group. He even traveled with them when they fled Austria and continued to direct them during their tours across Europe and the United States. However, Father Wozner doesn't appear in the film at all. Instead, the filmmakers created a fictional character named Max Detweiler, who plays a similar role as someone who helps the family pursue music. The decision to exclude Father Wozner was likely based on concerns that featuring a priest in such a central role might distract from the story's focus on Maria. Still, many fans of the real story believe that his absence leaves out a key part of how the family became successful performers. The film also softens and simplifies Maria's personality. On screen, she's shown as shy, gentle, and somewhat uncertain, especially at the start, but in reality, Maria was energetic, headstrong, and not always easy to manage. As a young woman, she had a lot of difficulty adjusting to life in the convent. She later described herself during that period as horrid, the worst you can imagine. She admitted to breaking dishes, running around the convent courtyard, talking when she was supposed to be silent, and even whistling Gregorian chants, which were meant to be solemn. At one point, she even climbed onto the roof of the abbey. These stories give a much different impression of Maria's character, one that's far more spirited and lively than the version seen in the film. One of the most emotional moments in the film is when Maria agrees to marry Captain Georg von Trapp. In the movie, it seems like a traditional love story, two people from different worlds falling in love as the threat of war looms over them. In real life, though, things happened quite differently. Maria wasn't sure she wanted to marry Georg at all. Their relationship didn't begin as a romantic one. Instead, George fell in love with Maria first, and he wanted her to stay in the house, not just as a teacher, but as a mother to his children. When he proposed, Maria didn't immediately say yes because she was deeply in love with him. In fact, she later said that if he had asked her directly, she might have refused. But she cared deeply for the children and felt it was her duty to help them. She believed that Georg had been guided to speak in a way that convinced her to stay. So, she agreed to marry him, not out of romantic passion, but out of love and commitment to the children. Real love between her and Georg developed gradually, over time. The movie also adds a dramatic twist to their marriage by showing it taking place just before they escape from the Nazis. This creates a sense of urgency and emotional tension. But in reality, Maria and Georg got married much earlier, on November 26, 1927. That's more than a decade before they fled Austria. At the time of their wedding, there was no political threat from the Nazis. Adolf Hitler hadn't taken over Austria yet, and the couple was able to start their life together in peace. They had 3 more children after their marriage and lived as a family for years before the political situation in Europe forced them to leave. Speaking of their escape, the film shows the Von Trapps sneaking over the mountains, carrying their instruments and luggage, hiding from Nazi officers. It's one of the most memorable and intense scenes in the movie. But this dramatic escape never actually happened. In real life, the family left Austria openly and without any dramatic chase. They boarded a train during the daytime and told people they were simply going to perform in America. They didn't need to sneak out on foot or climb over mountains. Instead, they kept things calm and low profile to avoid drawing attention. Maria von Trapp's daughter, also named Maria, later explained in interviews that their escape was carefully planned and didn't involve any suspenseful run through the countryside. Their musical director, Father Franz Wostner, and their secretary, Marta Zochbauer, traveled with them. Their journey began in Austria, then took them to Italy. Georg was able to claim Italian citizenship because he was born in a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire that had become Italian territory after World War I. From Italy, the family traveled to London, and then they boarded a ship bound for the United States. They arrived in America in the early 1940s and began touring the country as the Trapp family singers. To support themselves, they performed concerts and eventually settled in Stowe, Vermont. There, they opened a guest lodge in 1950. What started as a 27-room lodge grew over the years, and today it still exists as a much larger resort, owned and run by the Von Trapp family's descendants. Another detail that's different from real life is the family's financial situation. In the movie, the Von Trapps are shown as very wealthy. Their home is large and beautiful, they have servants, and they don't seem to have any financial worries. But this portrayal isn't accurate. Like many people in the 1930s, the Von Trapps were hit hard by the Great Depression. Their bank failed, and they lost most of their fortune. Without the funds to maintain their lifestyle, they had to let go of their servants and began renting out rooms in their home to make ends meet. It was during this time that they started to consider singing as a way to earn money. The family had always enjoyed singing together, but performing for the public was a new step. George was hesitant about it at first. His daughter Eleanor once said in an interview that it almost hurt her father to see his family on stage. It wasn't about pride or status. He simply wanted to protect their privacy and wasn't sure about putting their lives in the spotlight. Still, they needed the income, so they began performing at local concerts and festivals. Their audiences loved them, and they started to gain attention. In 1936, they even won first place in a major music competition in Austria. That victory helped launch their career as a touring musical group, which eventually brought them to America. There's also something curious about the names and identities of the children in the film. The movie shows 7 Von Trapp children, each with unique personalities and names like Liesel, Louisa, Kurt and Gretel. But in reality, the children's names, ages, and even genders were different. The 7 children from Georg's first marriage were named Rupert, Agot, Maria, Werner, Hedwig, Johanna, and Martina. Rupert, the eldest, was already an adult and studying medicine by the time the family left Austria. The filmmakers decided to change all of the names and characteristics to suit the story they wanted to tell. It helped them create characters that were easier to follow and added emotional depth to certain scenes. For example, the song 16 Going on 17 wouldn't have made much sense if the oldest child had actually been a grown man. So the character of Liesel was invented to take on that role. In addition to those 7 children, George and Maria had 3 more kids after they married. Their names were Rosemarie, born in 1929, Eleanor, born in 1931, and Johannes, born in 1939. Johannes was born in the United States after the family had already settled there. None of these 3 children appear in the movie at all. It's likely that the filmmakers chose to leave them out to keep the story simple and focused. Including 10 children would have made the film more complicated, especially for an audience trying to follow so many individual characters. Finally, it's worth pointing out that the Von Trapp family's love for music didn't start with Maria. The film implies that Georg had banned music in his home and that Maria reintroduced it, helping the family rediscover joy and togetherness. But, in reality, the family already had a strong passion for music before she arrived. Georg and his first wife loved music and made sure their children grew up surrounded by it. They often sang together as a family, and music was an important part of their lives. Maria helped strengthen that passion and introduce structure, but she wasn't the one who brought music into their lives for the first time. All of these differences between the real Von Trapps and their fictional counterparts highlight how much the story was adapted for the big screen. Changes were made to simplify the plot, increase the emotional stakes, and create a stronger sense of drama and romance. While the movie version doesn't always reflect historical accuracy, it still honors the spirit of the family's journey. Most fans of the film know there were 7 Von Trapp children portrayed on screen. What many don't realize is that the real family actually had 10 children. Georg Von Trapp had 7 children with his first wife, and then he and Maria had 3 more after their marriage. These 3 children, Rosemarie, Eleanor, and Johannes, are not featured in the movie at all. Rosemarie was born in 1929, Eleanor in 1931, and Johannes in 1939. Johannes was born in the United States after the family had already emigrated from Austria. Since the film focuses primarily on the events leading up to and just after the family's departure from Austria, the younger children didn't fit into the timeline of the screenplay. Additionally, including 10 children in the storyline would have made it far more difficult to develop their individual personalities and maintain a manageable length for the film. For storytelling purposes, the filmmakers focused on 7 fictionalized children with new names and traits, which help simplify the narrative and give each character a more distinct presence. Another major creative decision during the making of the film was casting the role of Captain Georg von Trapp. Christopher Plummer ultimately played the part, but the road to his casting wasn't smooth. In fact, Plummer wasn't keen on taking the role at all. Several big-name actors were considered, including Bing Crosby, Sean Connery, Yul Brynner, and Richard Burton. Each brought different strengths, but none were a perfect fit for what the director Robert Wise had in mind. Wise believed Christopher Plummer had the sophistication, screen presence, and emotional depth needed to play the captain. Plummer was best known at the time for his work on stage, especially on Broadway, and had a reputation as a serious actor. But when he was first offered the role, he turned it down multiple times. He felt the character as written was too flat and too rigid, and he didn't want to play a stereotypical authoritarian father figure. Eventually, Robert Wise flew to London to speak with Plummer in person. He explained how the film would be handled, reassured him that the script could be adjusted, and promised him the chance to shape the character alongside the screenwriters. Plummer agreed, though still with some hesitation. In later interviews, he admitted he had been worried the film would be too sentimental, but he grew to respect the quality of the production and the impact it had on audiences. Despite his initial doubts, Plummer brought real gravitas to the role. His performance helped anchor the film with a touch of seriousness that balanced the lighter, more musical elements. He was even allowed to tweak some of the dialogue to better suit his interpretation of the captain, something he appreciated as an actor. What many fans don't know is that Plummer's singing voice was not used in the final version of the film. Although he prepared for the role by practicing his singing and guitar skills, a professional baritone dubbed over his singing parts in post-production. The goal was to ensure the musical numbers maintained the quality expected from a Hollywood musical. Plummer, while initially disappointed, later acknowledged that the dubbing improved the overall sound of the film and kept it in line with the musical's high standards. While the film's cast and crew were working through creative challenges, the studio behind it, 20th Century Fox, was dealing with serious financial problems. In the early 1960s, the studio had invested a huge amount of money into a film called Cleopatra. Originally budgeted at $2 million, the cost of Cleopatra skyrocketed due to delays, production issues, and set changes, eventually reaching more than $44 million. Though the movie brought in money at the box office, it didn't earn enough to cover the enormous production costs. The situation left the studio teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. By the time production started on The Sound of Music, many executives at 20th Century Fox were unsure about moving forward with another large-scale musical. At the time, the popularity of musicals had started to decline, and there was concern that audiences might not turn out for a story that was so wholesome and sentimental. There were debates about whether the film would appeal to international audiences, whether its message was still relevant, and whether the format would feel outdated. Still, the studio moved ahead, and when The Sound of Music was released in 1965, the results were better than anyone had expected. Audiences around the world embraced the story, the music, and the performances. Julie Andrews, fresh off her success in Mary Poppins, charmed viewers with her warmth and energy. The songs, written by Rodgers and Hammerstein, struck a chord with audiences of all ages. The film went on to become the highest-grossing movie of 1965, but that wasn't the end of its success. By November 1966, just over a year after its release, The Sound of Music had become the highest-grossing film of all time, surpassing even Gone with the Wind, which had held the record for nearly 25 years. The success of the film helped bring 20th Century Fox back from the brink. The profits it generated allowed the studio to stabilize financially and continue making films. In a very real sense, The Sound of Music didn't just entertain millions of people, it saved an entire film studio. It's easy to take the film's success for granted today, given how beloved and frequently referenced it is, but at the time of its release, no one could have predicted just how far-reaching its impact would be. The Sound of Music went on to win 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. It also received nominations in multiple other categories and became a fixture of popular culture. Its soundtrack climbed the charts, its songs were sung in schools and homes, and its characters became iconic figures. And yet, for all of its success, The Sound of Music is still a film that was nearly derailed by doubts, disagreements, and financial uncertainty. The actors had mixed feelings about the roles, the studio feared the genre was fading, and the true story had to be significantly reshaped to fit the demands of Hollywood storytelling. Still, what emerged was a film that resonated across generations. It combined a sense of history with emotion, beauty, and music in a way that few films ever have. It offered hope during uncertain times and continues to do so even decades later. Today, The Sound of Music remains a powerful example of how creativity, risk-taking, and belief in a story can lead to something far bigger than originally imagined. Whether people come to it for the first time or return to it year after year, the film continues to connect with audiences, not just because of its famous songs or beautiful scenery, but because of the human stories, both on screen and behind the scenes, that make it timeless.